Welcome to Washington Today for Tuesday, November 2nd, 2021. I'm Nkoyo Iyamba. Here are some of today's headlines. World leaders promise to protect Earth's forests, cut methane emissions, and help South Africa wean itself off coal at the United Nations Climate Summit Tuesday. It's all part of a flurry of deals intended to avert catastrophic global warming. Britain hailed the commitment from over 100 countries to end deforestation in the coming decade as the first big achievement of the conference in Glasgow, Scotland, known as COP26. More on this in a moment with Nathanael of Grist. Facebook is shutting down its facial recognition system and will delete more than 1 billion people's individual facial recognition templates. Meta, the new name of Facebook's parent company, announced today the decision was made due to, quote, growing concerns about the use of facial recognition technology and its misuse by governments, police, and others. It's Election Day in many states, including in Virginia, where former Democratic Governor Terry McAuliffe is running against newcomer Republican challenger Glenn Youngkin. This year, a new state law requires counties to start processing mail-in ballots at least 7 days before Election Day so they can be counted and released on election night soon after the polls close at 7 p.m. Eastern Time. Counties are expected to release the results of their mail-in ballots first, followed by early in-person votes, and then finally, votes cast at local polling places on Election Day. First, we begin in Glasgow, Scotland, where President Biden wrapped up his trip abroad at the COP26 summit. At a press conference, President Biden responds to questions from reporters. We begin with Nancy Cordes of CBS.
Some of the commitments you made here won't happen unless Congress passes future legislation. How do you convince Republicans and even some Democrats to get behind more spending if they look at this conference and say, China isn't meeting these global goals, Russia doesn't intend to meet these global goals, India doesn't plan to, why should we?
Because we want to be able to breathe and we want to be able to lead the world. Look, I mean it sincerely. I think, presumptuous of me to say, talk for another leader, but the fact that China, trying to assert, understandably, a new role in the world as a world leader, not showing up, come on. The single most important thing that's gotten the attention of the world is climate. Everywhere. From Iceland to Australia to, it just is a gigantic issue. And they've walked away. How do you do that and claim to be able to have any leadership mantle? The same with Putin and Russia. His tundra is burning. He's in a literally the tundra is burning. He has serious, serious climate problems. And he is mum on the willingness to do anything. And so I genuinely believe, and I mean this from the bottom of my heart, when I said at COP7, at the G7, that America was back, people wondered well, is that really true? Well, we were able to change the dynamic of a lot of things coming out of the G7. I think what I'm about to say sounds awfully self-serving. 2 world leaders came up to me today and said, thank you for your leadership. You're making a big difference here. You're moving people. I think you and I talked about that, John, with one of the folks talking to us. And so I think the fact that America showed up and decided to lead and laid out clearly what it wished to do.
President Biden's climate campaign is already eliciting disappointment from some environmentalists who wanted the administration to go further to prevent oil industry leaks. The EPA's proposed regulations that would stiffen requirements to plug leaks in oil and gas wells would still permit flaring of unwanted natural gas from oil wells. Meanwhile, Republicans have their own plans to work on climate change. Here's House Minority Whip, Louisiana Republican Representative Steve Scalise.
Both your state and Ms. Stefanik's state have been hit hard by climate change-related natural disasters, even as recently as this year. What is the Republican plan for addressing climate change, as you've criticized President Biden for going overseas to this global climate summit?
Yeah, well, first of all, we had hurricanes a lot longer than we've had changes in carbon emissions. Carbon emissions have been around since before man walked the earth. I mean, you've seen 10,000 years ago, you can look at the record, and we had warmer temperatures on the earth than we do today because it goes up and down. We've had freezing periods in the 1970s. They said it was going to be a new cooling period. And now it gets warmer, it gets colder. That's called Mother Nature. But the idea that hurricanes or wildfires were caused just in the last few years is just fallacy. If you look at what we're doing in Louisiana, for example, we actually work to restore our coast, to put barriers out where they don't exist anymore because we cordoned off the Mississippi River. Over 100 years ago, America made a decision for commerce to put levees up all the way down the Mississippi River. That used to deposit silt all throughout the delta of South Louisiana. You don't have that silt anymore going into those areas to rebuild land because the levees cordon it off and then it all dumps off in the Gulf of Mexico. So what are we doing? We're actually using some of the revenue from drilling. It's called revenue sharing. We use the revenue to rebuild land. If you cut off the ability for us to produce oil in the Gulf of Mexico, that actually takes away our ability to go and restore that land, the funding source that we use to rebuild land, to put barriers in place so you can knock storms down before they hit land where people are. Those are the kind of things that we've been doing to deal with storms that have been coming here for thousands of years. But at the end of the day, if you look at what we've done in America, we were reducing carbon emissions. No country reduced carbon emissions more than the United States of America, and that was when we got out of the Paris Accord. There's not a single country in Europe that's in compliance with the Paris Accord, including France.
House Minority Whip Representative Steve Scalise, Republican of Louisiana, speaking with reporters earlier. Inspired by his travels to space, Amazon founder Jeff Bezos announced that he would pledge $2 billion to help restore nature.
In too many parts of the world, nature is already flipping from a carbon sink to a carbon source. This is a profound and urgent danger to us all. That's why last month in New York, 9 philanthropic organizations announced an additional $5 billion to support the goal of 30 by 30, to protect 30% of all land and sea by 2030. I was honored to be a part of this with a $1 billion pledge from the Bezos Earth Fund. And today, I'm pleased to announce a $2 billion pledge allocated directly to restoring nature and transforming food systems. This is part of the Bezos Earth Fund's $10 billion commitment to fight climate change, enhance nature, and advance environmental justice and economic opportunity. Together, this $3 billion in pledges will drive a new threefold nature agenda for the Bezos Earth Fund, focused simultaneously on conservation, restoration, and food transformation. We must conserve what we still have. We must restore what we've lost. And we must grow what we need to live without degrading the planet for future generations to come.
That was Amazon founder Jeff Bezos speaking at the United Nations Climate Summit Tuesday. He and other entrepreneurs have been criticized for spending money on trips to space instead of solving problems here on Earth. Amazon has also been criticized by its workers over environmental practices. At this year's United Nations Conference of Parties on Climate Change in Glasgow, Scotland, President Biden announced that he plans to heavily regulate methane, a potent greenhouse gas. And leaders at the Glasgow Climate Conference also announced a pact by over 100 countries to end deforestation by 2030. At Grist.org, Nathanael Johnson writes, "Every year, hopes soar for an agreement that will wrestle emissions to zero. And every year, those hopes are dashed." Senior staff writer at Grist, Nathanael Johnson, is here to help us make sense of some of the skepticism. Please help us understand, why are hopes being dashed?
Well, there's a real need for muscular action on climate change. That much is clear. And the tool that we have, the most obvious tool to achieve that, is the UN climate agreement. That's our big overarching global governance. And the problem is that it's a tool that can't really accomplish that kind of savior type action. It's, if you have a hammer, everything looks like a nail. The UN climate agreement, the equivalent of pounding in nails for that, what it can actually really do well is help countries cooperate on things that they already want to do anyway and, prevent chaos and resource wars. So trying to use that hammer to end climate change tomorrow and wrestle emissions down to zero is sort of like using a hammer to put out a fire. It's just not going to work.
And even British Prime Minister Boris Johnson warned at the climate conference that leaders need to commit to follow through with actions. What do you make of that?
Well, talk is cheap. It's very easy for a leader to get up and say they're going to make 100% cuts by 2070, as India just did. Industry has made similar promises like this. I remember reporting on the Declaration on Forests. What was that? Back 10 years ago, when all these big corporations promised to end deforestation. You get your moment as a leader. You want to be able to make a big promise like that, and it's very easy to do. It's much harder to then follow through and make that happen. So, it's useful to set that gold ring out there. But then where the rubber meets the road is figuring out how you actually do that.
Media reports are stating that the world's major climate polluters and leaders of those countries, including Xi Jinping of China and Vladimir Putin of Russia, did not attend the summit. Also, Jair Bolsonaro of Brazil, nor Erdogan of Turkey attended the summit. How significant is this in terms of thwarting the progress that promises to be made with the summit?
I'm not sure it's that significant. I actually think that when you look at what the climate summit can actually do, what it's best at doing, it's the sort of thing that's really best left to the bureaucrats. The big leaders of these countries, they come and they fulminate and they deliver speeches, and sometimes they make big promises. But what the UN conferences are really good at is figuring out the nitty-gritty of how, one country's steel industry is going to share technology with another country in order to allow them to shift from coal-fired furnaces to electric arc welding that doesn't produce the same type of emissions. These sectoral, down in the weeds type of things. And so if we can just have that happen, have people in the Environmental Protection Agency from the U.S. talking to their counterparts in China and making connections and building trust, that's what really matters more than the heads of state attending.
How to Measure Success at COP26 by Nathanael Johnson, Senior Staff Writer at Grist. 2 questions. Is it too late to make a significant impact on climate change? And if so, in your article you write, so what's the point of this COP?
Well, it's definitely not too late. In one sense, every moment that we continue down this road of increasing emissions, things get a little worse. It's like we're living in a house that's full of termites, and if we fix it today, it'll be cheaper than if we fix it tomorrow. The more damage that we do, the more likely that someone falls through a floor, the more we're going to have to tear apart and repair in the long run. So it's never too late, but every moment is better than the next moment to fix the damage. And the point of these big international climate agreements is to do the work that can be done. We don't have a global government that can force rapid emissions cuts. We aren't going to be able to make unwilling countries do things that they don't want to do. But we do have this system that's in place that can help facilitate cooperation, that can bring this focus to the problem, that can get every individual government to pay attention to this and start setting goals at home and realize that it's really in their interest to work with everybody else and not just to sort of strike out on their own, start hoarding their resources and caring about themselves and starting wars with other people rather than cooperating.
How to Measure Success at COP26 by Nathanael Johnson, senior staff writer at Grist. You can find the article at grist.org. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you. It's been my pleasure.
We now head to the Senate. Democratic lawmakers have reached a deal on legislation to lower prescription drug prices. The details are expected to be included in President Biden's social spending package. With more on this announcement, here's Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer.
I have an important announcement on progress for the President's agenda. I'm pleased to announce that an agreement has been reached to lower prescription drug prices for seniors and families in the Build Back Better legislation. Fixing prescription drug pricing has consistently been a top issue for Americans year after year, including the vast majority of both Democrats and Republicans who want to see a change because they simply cannot afford their medications. We've heard this from people across the country who have serious illnesses and can't afford their medicine. What a painstaking position to be in. It's horrible. Today, we've taken a massive step forward in helping alleviate that problem. By empowering Medicare to directly negotiate prices in Part B and Part D, this deal will directly reduce out-of-pocket drug spending for millions of patients every time they visit the pharmacy or doctor. It will cap out-of-pocket spending at $2,000 per year, ending the days where a life-changing diagnosis could mean thousands upon thousands of dollars in new expenses. And it will reform the entire industry to stop price gouging. And change both drug company and health insurer incentives to make sure our country's drug pricing system benefits patients, not corporations. I want to thank many of my colleagues who worked on this. Senator Klobuchar, who was here, Senators Wyden, Murphy, Cortez Masto, Bennett, and Kelly. Senators Shaheen, Hassan, and Smith for their leadership on insulin. The price from insulin will go down from $600 an injection or a dose to $35, where it should always have been if we would have had proper laws in place. And Senator Sinema has told me she supports this agreement, so I think we're there.
Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer speaking to reporters earlier. But Republicans are banking on two Democratic senators to guide their actions against President Biden's Build Back Better agenda. We hear now from Senate Minority Leader, Kentucky Republican Mitch McConnell.
If the House goes ahead and passes this social spending bill, bounces it over here, obviously there would probably have to be changes. You know how things always work with the voter rule and everything else. So what would we anticipate from Republicans to try to throw gears in the process here during the vote-a-rama to try to mess with that bill to make it harder for the House of Representatives to process that bill when it goes back?
Well, I think we all know there are two Democratic senators that are going to be able to write this bill. Joe Manchin and Kyrsten Sinema will determine what the bill looks like. There is a process for amendments, and you can be assured that we'll have a robust amendment process during the vote-a-rama. But I think we all know, and I think the House knows as well, that Manchin and/or Sinema are going to write the bill. And then I would observe this seems to be quite a challenging exercise for them. I'm glad it is. This is a bill America does not want and does not need. The ideal solution would be to not pass it. But if it's to pass, it'll be written by Manchin and/or Sinema.
Leader McConnell.
Yeah.
One of the most popular polling-wise provisions that was in that bill was the paid family leave provision. It doesn't seem like that's going to be in the final version. Is there any version of a paid family leave proposal that Republican senators would support or that you would support should it come up sometime down the line?
Look, if I were the majority leader and we were setting the agenda, that'd be a good discussion to have. But we're not setting the agenda. We're reacting to what they're proposing, and that seems to be challenging for them as well.
Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell speaking to reporters earlier. Washington Today continues in a moment.
Wednesday on C-SPAN Radio, live at 10 a.m. Eastern, House Intelligence Committee holds a hearing on efforts to counter domestic terrorism. Testifying will be officials from the FBI and Homeland Security Department. That's live at 10 a.m. Eastern on Wednesday on C-SPAN Radio. Listen anywhere on the C-SPAN Now mobile app.
Welcome back to Washington Today. This report from FoxNews.com, Democrats asked reporters to do a better job selling President Biden's Build Back Better agenda, lamenting that press coverage has focused too heavily on the negotiation process instead of the substance of the plan. Speaking to reporters, House Democratic Caucus Chair, New York Representative Hakeem Jeffries, discussed negotiations within the party over the path forward on President Biden's social spending proposal and a bipartisan infrastructure bill.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. At this point, can you tell us if you are still expecting a vote this week on the Infrastructure and Build Back Better Act, and can you also elaborate on some of the outstanding issues that need to be resolved?
Well, it's my hope that we'll be in a position to be able to vote at some point this week, but the administration has been very clear in terms of deadlines and timelines. Let's work through all of the outstanding issues to get to a place where we can put these bills to a vote, get them over the finish line, and then get these things done for the American people. Our focus at the end of the day is on making sure we create, as the DPCC has outlined, millions of good-paying jobs, that we cut taxes for families with children, and that we lower costs for everyday Americans. I think there's widespread agreement that those are the right things to be doing on behalf of the American people. There's some technical issues that folks are working through with respect to some of the climate provisions and some of the health care provisions, but I believe at the end of the day, we're going to find common ground as we always do.
So just to follow up on that, if it does come to the floor this week, the Build Back Better, do you believe that the Progressive Caucus will vote for the bill even without an ironclad commitment for support from Senator Manchin?
Well, I'll yield to any of my colleagues on this, but I believe that we need an ironclad commitment as it relates to a framework around the Build Back Better Act that all 50 senators will support. I think that's been an understanding as we've proceeded from the very beginning. President Biden has laid that out. Speaker Pelosi has laid that out. I support the notion that we need an ironclad agreement as it relates to all of the provisions of the Build Back Better Act that will be supported by 50 senators.
Representative Hakeem Jeffries of New York also told reporters that the committee plans to message with, quote, simplicity and repetition about all the good, big, transformative, bold things that we have done for the American people, end quote. But House Republican leaders talked to reporters about why they're not supporting President Biden's agenda. Here's House Minority Whip, Louisiana Representative Steve Scalise.
Taking a look at the reconciliation bill, Senator Joe Manchin came out on the other side of the chamber, came out yesterday and said that he's not going to support this until he finds out what impact it's going to have economically. House Republicans' reaction to that?
Well, you've heard the president over and over again saying there's no cost to this bill. It's laughable. People know when you add trillions of dollars of new spending on top of the trillions they've already spent, that is the leading driver of inflation. People are already paying too much for goods and everything that they buy because of the trillions already that have been spent. If you had trillions more in spending, of course it's going to have a cost. Not the least would be the natural gas tax, which everybody who uses natural gas would pay. President Biden promised that nobody who makes less than $400,000 will pay a dime in new taxes. The problem is he breaks that promise with his natural gas tax, among many other taxes in this package. So this will hurt families even more than what he's already done to hurt families with higher inflation. That's why 71% of people think we're on the wrong track.
Representative Steve Scalise, Republican of Louisiana. In a vote of 14-0, the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention's independent vaccine advisors unanimously approved the Pfizer-BioNTech COVID-19 vaccine for kids ages 5 to 11. Politico.com reporting that this clears the last major regulatory hurdle to immunizing young children. Here's Pfizer CEO Albert Bourla speaking on CNBC about the COVID vaccine for kids.
I know that the U.S. government has placed orders with us that basically covers every kid of this country. So I think the supply will be there, and hopefully a lot of kids will benefit from it.
Pfizer CEO Albert Bourla speaking on CNBC. The FDA granted emergency approval for the shots on Friday, and by Monday, the White House said that it had already begun processing on Friday, moving 15 million doses from Pfizer's freezers and facilities to distribution centers. And speaking of vaccines, 6 New York firefighters remain suspended for 4 weeks without pay. That's after protesting the state's vaccine mandate. Here's New York City Mayor Bill de Blasio and Fire Commissioner Daniel Nigro speaking to reporters about the situation.
Let me just say at the outset, as we turn to Commissioner Nigro, Bob, that just disgusted me. These were members of the fire department in uniform who accosted fellow public servants who work for a state senator. They mistreated them, from everything we've heard. In uniform, on duty, acting on their own political beliefs. That's unacceptable on so many levels. It's almost impossible to cover all the ground. It's so bad. I want to thank Commissioner Nigro for very aggressively acting with those suspensions. And look, that's a major, major offense in my book, a major crossing the line. I think further discipline absolutely is called for. But what is most important was the message was sent literally instantly by the commissioner and the department that was unacceptable. And I think a lot of people who are deeply troubled by that appreciated the swiftness of the commissioner's action. Go ahead, Commissioner.
Thank you. And I'm always happy to be on the call, Bob. Thanks for the question. As Mayor said, we immediately suspended these members for the maximum allowed to us under the city rules, 28 days. This case is then, we have a very robust investigative group here at the fire department. It'll be investigated, as all of our cases are. People will have a chance to tell their side of the story, and we'll move on from there. And of course, the penalties can be anywhere from what they've already received up to and including termination. But I wouldn't try to speculate on where this will lead until we investigate the whole thing. But initially, as the mayor said, we were very, very troubled by this and took very swift action.
New York City Mayor Bill de Blasio and Fire Commissioner Daniel Nigro. Roughly 2,300 members of the New York City Fire Department and firefighters have called out sick as the city's COVID-19 vaccine mandate for municipal workers remain in effect. A reminder that all of our coverage is online anytime at cspan.org. And if you missed any of this program, you can find it at cspan.org/podcasts or wherever you listen to podcasts. And if you'd like more on the stories that are shaping Washington, delivered daily right to your inbox, you can subscribe to C-SPAN's evening newsletter, word for word. Just go to cspan.org/connect to subscribe. I'm Nkoyo Iyamba. Thanks for listening today to Washington Today.
C-SPAN's Washington Journal. Every day we take your calls live on the air on the news of the day, and we discuss policy issues that impact you. Coming up Wednesday morning, we'll discuss the results in the governor's races in New Jersey and Virginia, also the political environment heading into campaign 2022 with National Journal Hotline editor Leah Ascarina. And then a look at President Biden's Build Back Better agenda and upcoming fiscal deadlines with Pennsylvania Republican Congressman Fred Keller and Michigan Democratic Congresswoman Brenda Lawrence. Watch Washington Journal live at 7 Eastern Wednesday morning on C-SPAN or on C-SPAN Now, our new mobile app. Join the discussion with your phone calls, Facebook comments, texts, and tweets.
And this is for all nonfiction book readers out there. Check out the new C-SPAN podcast about books. Each episode delves into news about the publishing industry, reports on bestsellers, trends, and book reviews. Now, this week's episode features former longtime president and publisher of Regnery Books, Margie Ross. She discusses the cancel culture in the publishing industry. We'll also look at some new nonfiction books by members of Congress, including Trump impeachment manager Adam Schiff of California, the About Books podcast. Find it and follow it wherever you get your podcasts, including on the new C-SPAN Now app.